You may be seated. I want to start off by thanking everyone for coming out here. This is a great turnout. I'm really happy to see everyone's face here. I want to wish the Marine Corps a happy 236th birthday. And I'm going to keep it real brief. Western Washington President Bruce Shepard is going to start off with our speakers, followed by Janelle Marshall and Cassie Myers. Bruce, thank you.
Thank you all for being here, and I just want to express a warm welcome to all of you for being here, but also to speak from my heart about something that is very, very important to me, and why I really appreciate our gathering today in a time where we celebrate what we've been given by those who've gone in harm's way in our behalf, the prices they have paid for us and for our liberty, in which we say thank you, we remember, we reflect. We understand that it's a community and a societal obligation as well as individual commitments. I've had two sons serve in the military and a dad, so I know there are family implications here as well for all of us that make these commitments and feel the consequences of the courage people have shown to protect us all. When I first got here, it was in September, and Veterans Day came up very quickly, and went to attend the ceremony. And several of you have heard me tell this story, but it still moves me a great deal. Because I went there, and it was a little bit of a rainy day, Bellingham in November, not a surprise. We were down at the new flagpoles down there and raising flags and going through a ceremony of moving the flags from where they had been. And it felt to me like there were 6 people in attendance standing in the rain. There were probably a few more than that. And none of our students spoke. And so I asked several of our students who were veterans, why? And they said, well, here at Western, they think the culture is such they don't really talk about the fact that they're veterans here. And that just hit me, boom. There was something, of course, fundamentally wrong with that. And one of the nice things about being a president is you can go and talk to folks and say, hey, we got to change this. And good people who know things that you don't figure out how to change it. And they've done a remarkable job. And I really want to thank all who have made possible what is now a year-round program of expanded opportunities to serve vets, to support vets, to provide gathering areas, to support those who are currently serving overseas. and in lots of neat ways. And to just see no longer just 6 people gathering on a Veterans Day to remember and say thank you, it says a lot right there here. So I appreciate your being here as well. We have 139 vets in our student body. We have 117 vets serving in our faculty or staff. I was a little bit surprised when I looked at those data. We have a number of our professional staff who are veterans. I'd sort of expected that the largest percentage or numbers would come from our classified staff, and that's true, but only by a narrow margin. We have almost as many veterans amongst our faculty as well here at this university. So those are all important, but that number of our students, 139 students, is way too small. We need to be working on that, and we are, in partnership with our 2-year colleges through our 2-year consortium, to make sure that we are easing pathways for veterans to come to Western to benefit from the education Western has to offer. We have a very simple strategic direction to take our considerable strengths and apply them to meet the state's critical needs, and here's an obvious example of how we need to be doing a better job in that direction. Our commitment to you is that you will see that happen, and it's not simply because there's a societal obligation. I don't talk about veterans' benefits, I talk about societal obligations to veterans that we need to fulfill here, but it's because our veterans enrich through their leadership and experience, everybody else's education on this campus. So our commitment is to see those numbers grow in the future. Again, thank you very much for being here.
Ho, Mekodapi. Dakota ia Wamni Hoksi. In the Nakota language, my name is Wamdi Hoksi. It's Duatogahe Magyabi. That was my boy's name. My warrior's name is Duatogahe. That is the first scout. It's important that I acknowledge my elders and my people. I'm from Nakota people, the Red Bottom Band. The Fort Peck Reservation in Montana is where I'm enrolled. And it's important that we acknowledge, if you will give me the patience, that we are on Lummi Nation land. This is Lummi land the university is built on, and I thank them for their hospitality in allowing us to hold our celebrations and our ceremonies here. I'm pleased to see so many people out here. I was not one of those 6 or 8 or 10 people that stood in the rain with President Shepherd when he was first here. And I think that says something that he's picked up on. It says something about the culture that was here and somehow permeates the culture a lot of times in the academy. An unwelcoming atmosphere, a sense that we don't really belong, and as a faculty member here, I'm aware that we teach peace, that we teach a better way, that we try all the time to make this a better world, and somehow we forget to acknowledge the fact that we've had policies, and we continue to have policies that put young women and young men in harm's way, that create veterans. They've done it for a long, long time. And I suggest that when I first came here in 1999, that it was not, it was something I was always aware of and proud of, but that one other faculty member at Fairhaven College was a Marine veteran as well, another veteran, the only one. We're rare. And we're teaching all the time about peace, and so it's understandable perhaps that we haven't given ourselves credit for having served, and we certainly don't make it a welcoming place all the time for younger, newer veterans that we create every day. So those are some of the remarks I want to make today, speak to this, this problem and this, what I hope is a renewed commitment to these younger veterans. I have a couple of things I want to, since I have the pulpit here, and an Indian way, it's mine until I get thrown off of here or get asked by the elders to leave. So I have several things I want to speak to. One of them, I want to disabuse a lot of people of a stereotype that I talked to my students about this morning at some length, maybe longer than they wanted to hear it. When I came back from Vietnam in 1968, I served in the 3rd Marine Division on the demilitarized zone in 1967 and 1968. And I came back and I left Vietnam one day in the afternoon, in the evening. I was on Okinawa that night. I was on San Francisco the next day, headed home for the reservation. And nobody spat on me. Nobody cursed at me, called me a baby killer. That's not my experience. I've had people ask me how it was like to be a Vietnam veteran and to come back and have people spit on me. And I said, no one spat on me. No one cursed me. The closer I got to home, the more comfortable I felt, even wearing a uniform. You wore a uniform in those days. You got cheaper ride on the trains, you know. And nobody did that. In fact, I got close to home. When I got home, I got in Indian country. We honor our veterans. Our veterans, all things being equal, will get the job. All other things being equal, they're the ones who are elected. It's a long-standing, centuries-old, thousands of years old tradition that we come home to. And I think that helped in a way. At least I didn't, as I say, I didn't get spat upon. But there were other problems of adjustment, and as many of you are aware, and I hope to make many of the people in our audience aware, we suffer a lot of times from an alienation and from a sense that others don't know what we've been through, what we've experienced, and where we've got. And we're reluctant a lot of times to speak about it, and this is trauma, and this is post-traumatic stress, and there are all sorts of things associated with it. But one of the things that I want to really speak about is a sense that when I then attended the University of Minnesota, after 7 years in the Marine Corps, and as a combat veteran, and proud, I didn't feel comfortable going to the traditional veterans organizations. I didn't feel comfortable with the older veterans. And it's not because my father didn't serve in the Pacific in the Marine Corps in World War II, he did, and my uncles served. They were on the Bataan Death March. Not because of that, but because the older veterans often said, oh, your war, that's not really a war. It wasn't really a war. And you know, the sad thing is I've heard that said recently about our veterans now, that that's not really a war. Oh my God, how many days was that? And you're only there for a little while. And gee whiz, you got Skype, and you got all this. And I want to call that for the bullshit it is. And I want to ask older veterans to listen to these people, not just listen, but to hear them, and to honor their service and their sacrifice. Those of you who really know that 7 minutes, 7 days, 7 hours, 7 months, 7 years in combat, it's all the same. It doesn't matter. And service, if you are serving and may not even see combat, is service. To be honored furthers the goals of the nation and the people, protects the people. All those things we hold dear, regardless of our politics, regardless of how we value and what we think of a particular war and the policy behind it. The veterans, we send those young women and those young men into that. And we need to honor them when they come back from it. And I say that because it was difficult for a lot of us. We didn't feel comfortable. We didn't belong. We didn't feel like we belonged. But now here we are. Now we are what we what we had to put up with ourselves, and it's incumbent upon us to change that. That was 43 years ago. Gee, almost 43 years ago I came back. Came back at the end of October. I've got to admit I was a drinker in those days. That was you couldn't be a Marine without it, and all the other things. And the Marine Corps birthday rolled around November 10th, 1968. Whew, boy, I had a hell of a party up on home. All my uncles, my dad, and all of them, they just contributed to it. All that younger cohort of young men who went to the Marine Corps the next year and followed us. And November 11th was Traditional Veterans Day. I didn't see any reason to sober up for that. And November 12th, I got married. My partner hates it when I tell my students that about it. I got drunk, I stayed drunk, and then I got married. No! 43 years ago this weekend. Same woman. And I want you to, if you are a veteran, or if you're the partner or the loved one of a veteran, understand and know that this is where we get our strength. This is what keeps us going. This is what makes it possible, is that patience and love that comes from our families and loved ones. Sometimes we don't show it as well as we should. Sometimes we hurt those that are close to us. But they're the ones who stay there constantly and patiently, loving us, and loving us. Else I don't know how we'd do it. Well, I wanted to start this out on a light note. I see a couple of my students in here. One of them I addressed this morning and told this to. I said, I'm going to start this out by telling the audience that you always know when the old gunny's going to tell a sea story. You know, we know what sea stories are. Sea stories are those stories that always begin, now this ain't no shit. And you always know when you're going to have to listen to it. It's sort of like listening to the Cheyenne elders when they pray. You know, don't lock your knees. Just relax, because it's going to go on and on and on. Well, I don't intend to go on and on and on, because I would be disrespectful of those younger veterans who are going to speak, about whom I just suggested we must honor and respect. And I look forward to hearing their words, and I want to offer my support to them as I do to any of the veterans I've had in my classes. Some of them are here. I recognize that and I appreciate it. I invite you all, in fact, I would sincerely ask you all as older veterans to show them that respect and that honor that we may not have always received ourselves. Pinamia, we say in my language. Pinamia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. It's actually a lot bigger turnout than I was expecting. 6 people might be a lot nicer, but it's great to see you all. I'm Janelle Marshall. I'm a student here at Western Washington, and I'm a United States Air Force reservist, as you might be able to tell from my uniform. I'm currently serving at McCord Airfield in Tacoma. I'd like to share with you all a story of some of the most inspirational women I've ever had the pleasure of reading about. They're known as the Angels of Bataan and Corregidor. I recently read a book entitled All This Hell, U.S. Nurses Imprisoned by the Japanese. In it, the authors Monahan and Needle talk about 84 U.S. nurses, both Navy and Army Nurse Corps, that were stationed in the Pacific when the Japanese overtook the region. After the initial attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, the Japanese quickly turned their attention to Guam and the Philippines. Only 15 minutes after the first bombs dropped on Pearl Harbor, 9 Japanese planes bombed the island of Guam, where a garrison of 500 Marines and sailors were stationed with no artillery. At that time, only 5 nurses were assigned to the hospital, and only an hour into that attack, these nurses were overwhelmed with scores of wounded. Although the island of Guam is about 1,500 miles from the Philippines, it was of major strategic importance to the Japanese. These women stationed on Guam would be the first U.S. military women to be taken prisoner of war by the Japanese. On December 23rd, at approximately 1800, General MacArthur made his retreat from Manila to the rock fortress of Corregidor. He decided that in order to save the city of Manila, he would declare it an open city. American and Filipino forces would make a desperate retreat to Corregidor. Not all military nurses made this initial retreat. Some stayed behind in order to help equip a ship of patients headed for Australia. Ultimately, some of those nurses would be captured and taken prisoner, taken to Santa Scholastica College, where the Japanese had set up an internment camp. Those that weren't captured made their way to Corregidor. The battle was raging. After the first bombing of Corregidor on December 29, 1941, the hospital and therefore the nurses were moved immediately underground to the Malinta Tunnel. It's important to note that this time of year it's extremely hot and extremely humid in this region. The Malinta Tunnel was built by the U.S. Army. It's a tunnel about 15-foot high ceilings, 25-foot wide pathways, and about 20 lateral tunnels running off the main tunnel. Eventually, it would come to hold about 1,000+ hospital beds, most of which were surgical patients. Surgery was equipped for blackout condition and was run around the clock. Nurses and doctors were 24/7. Supplies were decreasing, food and water rations were growing smaller, and the number of ill and wounded to care for was growing larger. Living conditions were poor and extremely overcrowded. Yet through all this adversity, these nurses continued to make themselves available. They put their emotional needs and their health needs to the side in order to serve those who were defending the rock. At exactly 12 o'clock on May 6, 1942, after almost 5 months of combat conditions in this hospital, these women would know what it was like to be taken prisoner of war. The Japanese removed all able-bodied men from the tunnel, leaving behind medical personnel and their patients. Eventually, many of the nurses developed dengue fever, malaria, and dysentery. By July 3, 1942, the Japanese had placed all medical personnel and patients on a ship. They were told they were going to be transported to the outskirts of Manila, where a hospital had been set up. As Winston Churchill said, this was not the end of their time in hell. It wasn't even the beginning of the end. It was, in fact, just the end of the beginning. Instead of being taken to a military camp, they were taken to Santo Tomas internment camp, leaving their patients at a different camp. These nurses arrived with no possessions and no money. These 58 POWs were placed in a room for their first 6 weeks at Santo Tomas. The only time they were allowed to leave the room was twice a day for meals. These meals were located in a room in the same building, only 1 story below. For the first year and a half, the food was adequate, but by no means plentiful. Japanese captives were treated with disrespect and brutality. The camp was infested with rats. There was no working toilets, and the Japanese performed surprise inspections at will. Over their time in the camp, the food rations became significantly smaller. Many captives became extremely malnourished, and people became ill, in part due to the horrible living conditions. On February 3, 1945, 4 years after Pearl Harbor, the Santo Tomas internment camp was finally liberated by American forces. At this point, all the internees were extremely malnourished, and part of that liberation plan was to remain at Santo Tomas until evacuation could be completed successfully. Days after that first phase, the Japanese continued to shell the camp. On February 12th, the POW nurses and some Army personnel left Manila on a C-47. By February 21st, 1945, after 30 months of combat conditions in a war zone, they were on their way back to the U.S. Through all these unimaginable hardships, these Navy and Army Nurse Corps nurses continued their duty in the face of adversity. These women serve as a significant inspiration in my life. I know there are countless other stories of all our American veterans that inspire each and every one of you in the same way. Today is a day to reflect upon those who have served or are continuously serving. A big thanks to all our American veterans and those who have sacrificed for our country. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for being here today. My name is Cassie Myers, and I am a senior here at Western. I'm majoring in history and secondary education. I served in the Navy for 5 years. I joined right out of high school. Going to college and diving headfirst into thousands of dollars in student loans didn't seem very appealing to me, so I signed up. I graduated from high school in Arlington in 2003, and I left for boot camp shortly after. After I finished boot camp, I got stationed on Whidbey Island. This actually ended up being a blessing in disguise. I spent the majority of my time in the service on deployment, but I was able to come home after every deployment. I've been to Japan, Guam, the Philippines, Curacao, Spain, Germany, Greece, Sicily, Bahrain, and Qatar. I was never home for more than 3 months at a time, but I was lucky enough to be home for Christmas every year. Contrary to what you might think, I never deployed on a ship. In fact, I have only been on a ship as part of a tour. I was in the Navy when I took that tour. I volunteered and was part of a community outreach program called the Sea Cadets. My official duty was to exercise the kids into the ground. It also got me out of work for 2 weeks. I worked on EP3s as an aviation electronics technician, second-class petty officer, which is basically a long and complicated name for a geek who pretends to know how to work on electronics. When I say pretend, I mean sometimes equipment wouldn't work, and I'd disconnect it, plug it back in, and miraculously it was working again. If that didn't work, sometimes I'd take the equipment out of the rack, drop it upside down, and put it back in, and it would fix itself. Anybody who's actually worked on old electronics knows that this actually works. I wouldn't try it with any flat screen TVs or DVD players, though. All joking aside, though, on Veterans Day, I feel weird considering myself part of that group. I never saw combat. The aircraft I worked on was designed for reconnaissance and whose mission was support those fighting on the ground. I pray that something I did at some point saved somebody's life, but I will never know because I didn't fly and I had no need to know what the mission was or whether or not it succeeded. The biggest sacrifice to me was my time. I'll be pushing 30 by the time I'm able to start my career as a teacher. On Veterans Day, there's always one veteran who I wish to honor, and that is my mom. I wouldn't be where I am or who I am without her. She had a rougher time in the military, as difficult as it was for me to be a 21-year-old night shift supervisor. She had it way worse as an air traffic controller in the Air Force in the 80s. Life for her after the military was rough as well. My dad went to college while she was in the military. When she got out, and it was her turn to start school, my parents divorced, and my mom found herself an uneducated, unemployed, single mom of 2 kids. We moved up to Washington when I was 7. My brother was 5. We bounced around with aunts and uncles for a few months while my mom found employment. She started school full-time and managed to juggle raising 2 kids and a full-time job. I have a hard enough time keeping up with my readings for my own classes. I don't know how she managed to do it because she never let on that life was hard. We were barely making it every month. My brother and I had no clue. Every night we had food, every Christmas we had gifts, and every new school year we had new clothes. When I was 12, I watched her graduate from Western. I knew then that I wanted to go to school here. I remember being fascinated by all of the sculptures that were on campus. Sometimes when I walk back to my car, I think of how things must have been for her. When the wind is insane and the rain is pouring down, I have no idea how she did it. I try and call her every day when I walk back to my car. I love that I am walking in her footsteps. I'll be calling her tomorrow to thank her for her service. I will also be thanking her for her amazing strength and the example that she set for me. Thank you all for being here today, and I hope you all have a veteran in mind that you will call tomorrow.
Thank you all for coming out today. As soon as I sat down, I forgot I didn't introduce myself. I'm Paul Nicholls. I'm a 6.5-year Navy veteran and this year's current Associated Students Veterans Outreach Coordinator. I'd like to thank everyone, the speakers. They were excellent speakers this year. I really enjoyed hearing their stories. And if everybody could please stand for the retiring of the colors. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to the Washington State National Guard. You did an excellent job today.